Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I am joined today by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well. Thank you.
Right on. So today's podcast, I'm looking forward to doing. It has like some assassination attempts, some bullets flying. It's got, a little bit of political intrigue. Let's see. It's got some overcoming of adversity and challenges, weakness, strength. Like, it's about Theodore Roosevelt. And I'm just telling you, folks, if you should listen to this series of podcasts I'm about to do on this book, and I'll jump right into it. It's called Theodore Roosevelt's Darkest Journey, The River of Doubt by Candace Millard. I read this book when it came out in 2005, and it's been on my mind ever since, basically. It's an incredible story about Theodore Roosevelt. And you've heard us talk about Theodore Roosevelt on earlier podcasts. Some of you have, some of you haven't. But if you're new, we've talked about Theodore. And there's a theme that follows him around everywhere he goes, which is he turns to the outdoors when things get tough. And he wants to push himself physically, mentally. The more stressed he is at home in civilized life, the more he wants to go on some grueling, physically demanding journey or epic crusade that is physically harsh. He loves the outdoors, and it restores him, makes him sane again. So when he goes back to his hectic life as president,
That's the only way I could deal with the crazy people you have to deal with as a president.
yeah, he turns to nature for solace. And so this is the president who gave us all of our public lands. He's the one that made the North American model of conservation a thing.
He made it cool.
He made it exist. Okay. The common man today can go and hunt big game. You might have to wait in line. You might have to draw a tag. A lot of over-the-counter opportunities, though, in a lot of states. But we have more game than we've had back in his time. And it's open to anyone who wants to go. And many of it can be just bought over-the-counter tags, and you can go and do it. We're trying to show that through the Gritty video series that we keep putting out, that these are, really easy point draws or over-the-counter opportunities. That adventures can be had on our public lands. People just aren't having because, they just aren't aware of the opportunity that's there. A lot of times it takes some kind of physical, endurance to get to some of these places. That's why the opportunity is so great. But when you think about the miles traveled that I do a hunt with, like, let's say Ryan on, those miles are minuscule compared to what they did back in this time period. It's Theodore Roosevelt grew up on horses, not in cars. So everything was a little different back then. But in this story, in the book, I'm going to cover this journey that Theodore Roosevelt takes down into the Amazon jungle, where he travels a river that's been uncharted, never been on this river before, called the River of Doubt. It has a couple other names as well, but this is a spot in the Amazon that no one has been down, a river that they don't know if it's even navigable. Like, is there giant waterfalls? Is there crocodiles the size of dinosaurs? Like, you don't know. This is 1912 or 1913. So it's a wild time. You don't really know what's going on in the Amazon jungle at this time. And you've got poisonous everything. Everything in the jungle is trying to kill you. You got diseases. You got native people that have poison dart arrows. And this story is like trying not to drown and die from poisonous animals or plants, trying to find food to survive, not get killed by people with native people with poison dart arrows. And
it's like a real live Indiana Jones, except
it is.
Roosevelt had guns.
Right. When you look at, like if you've watched Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's very like, yes, in my mind, I'm like listening to this, and it's totally like that as you read this book. It's insane. And it's so crazy. It's so crazy that when he returns from the trip, all of his contemporaries, all of the people that are explorers by trade, intellectuals, these adventure types, they're like, he must have went down the wrong river.
You took a left.
He only went a little ways. He didn't go as far as he said. It's impossible to have done the journey he did. And so all the newspapers and everything run that basically he's
Could
a
you
fraud.
imagine trying to discredit a freaking Rough Rider? That's ballsy, bro.
What happens is he's so, Theodore, so indignant. He's like, I know what I saw. I charted this river. We charted it with perfection. We almost died many, many times, and it was a harrowing journey. You had people stabbing each other, and you had murders, and not only were the animals in the jungle trying to kill you, but you had human two-legged predators out there also trying to kill you. It's a crazy, crazy story. And in fact, I think 2 very famous parties were put together of explorers who had done other adventures, who then followed up in Theodore's footprints to do the same journey. One was never heard from again, and the other one, like, one person survived, or 2 people, and they had to retreat, so they never actually finished the journey. So it's a pretty wild story. So whether you've read the book or not, I think this is going to be a fun podcast series for you to follow. We're going to try to publish 1 a week, basically, as we go through this. So look for the show. We'll put one out maybe like every Wednesday. We'll just make our way through the book. And if you've read the book, I think you're going to enjoy this because you're going to get some color commentary on it, and it'll be a nice refresher. It's crazy. It's just a cool story, and I think it inspires me to have bigger and badder adventures. Also, that it teaches me that Theodore was just tough, mentally tough, tougher than most men, and he just powered through things out of sheer will and determination. And his son Kermit is very similar. What possesses a person to want to do this, And then what are the ingredients in a human being that makes it possible for him to pull it off? Interesting questions. And as we go through this, I think you're going to really resonate or really enjoy this content, because if you're like me and you dream about adventures and you want to go and do things that are tough and you want to see what you're made of, you want to see parts of the world that most human beings never get to see, if you want to see animals that other people don't get to see, just see what's over the bend, This is an adventure story that is unsurpassed. I mean, it's right up there among great adventure stories.
There's a quote from Roosevelt that I wanted to pull up and talk about. It goes along with what you're saying. He says, "The first requisite of a good citizen in this republic of ours is that he should be able and willing to pull his weight, that he shall not be a mere passenger." I love that last line, that he shall not be a mere passenger. I feel too many people, especially in today's society, they're just going along with the flow. They're not really taking the helm and steering their own lives. And I feel most people that hunt are not taking the passenger route.
Well, there's a manliness to Roosevelt that we're going to get into, from, giving a speech after he's been shot, or down to where his father comes to him and says, "Son, God did not bless you. You're sickly, weak, pathetic, scrawny.
Son, you were not born lucky.
If you want to make something of yourself, you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to set your own fate. That means you're going to have to work out, exercise, and toughen yourself, because he might have given you a great mental power, but he didn't give you any kind of physical edge on anyone." So based on that, the man had to, that forms him as a young man into something else, overcoming the physical ailments that he had and having to tough it out.
Could you imagine if he never had a father? Who was going to give him that talk?
Yeah.
It's like the patriarchy is important. It's weird.
Well, I think the nuclear family is too.
Yes.
I think that the role our mother played was critical in the success of all of her children. She had 8 kids, and we're all hardworking, responsible people with
good intentions.
Also, nuclear families, successful, and children that were raising to be good people. And it took a father and a mother working hard to pull that off. And they both brought to the home their skills. It's like mom was sort of the brains behind the operation and the determination. And dad was just the threat.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I always, as a teenage boy, 17 years old, 16 years old, there are a lot of things paths I wanted to go down. And my mom was watching, and she's like, no, you're not going. You're not doing that. Mm-hmm. And had there not been a dad to back up what she told me to do, I'd have rebelled. Now, she might have been able to hold the line because she's tougher than hell, but she's not. She's not your average human being.
No, I remember, when I try to explain to people who my mother is, I tell them about this picture that I don't have. I need to find it. Mm-hmm. The picture of mom when she's like 8 or 9 months pregnant. The sewage line had broken. Mm-hmm. And they had a guy coming out to fix it. And mom was like digging down in an 8-foot deep hole, like in a nightie with a shovel, shoveling crap.
Pregnant.
And
she's tough. Mm-hmm. Always has been. Same with my dad. My dad's tougher than hell too.
But that's what, bringing it back, like his father, that conversation, you know, you never know. Yeah. Like his dad do you think his dad was super inspired to tell him, or what do you think it was an offhanded conversation?
It'll be interesting. We're going to get into a lot of this. But before we do, if you like the content we're producing and you want to help us out and you're in the market for some hunting gear or backpacking or outdoor gear, look at the coupon codes from our affiliate partners in the description field below this video. It's always posted there. And we've got stuff as far as broadheads, camping gear, pack rafts,
backpack food,
supplements, backpack food, Heather's Choice, Mountain Ops. Use the code Sissy Stick. Use the code for Sissy Sticks. Use the code for all these brands, and it really helps us keep.
If you're an East guy trying to come out west, check out that e-scouting.
Yeah, the e-scouting one I think is brilliant right now with Mark Livesey. Check that out. It's a great e-scouting class to help you.
It's an amazing tool to have in your back pocket.
Yep. Use the code GRITTY there. Thank you. So let's get into this, Brent. It's basically New York City on Halloween Eve in 1912. All right. It's about 5:30. This is where this story starts. And there's a Progressive Party major rally for a presidential campaign that's kicked off. All right. And what's going on here is, so Theodore, how did he become president, Brent? Do you remember?
Yes. He was serving under President McKinley, who got assassinated.
He only knows that because we just talked about it a minute ago. You screwed it up. You said FDR. Yes. So President McKinley was assassinated.
To be fair, I did remember that it was McKinley. I remembered on my own. I didn't look it up.
Okay. McKinley was assassinated, which then, I think within a year of the presidency or something like that. So Theodore Roosevelt became president just by virtue of being the vice president. So when the president was assassinated, he was next in line. Okay. Now, when you're president of the United States, you can serve 2 terms, right? That's it. Mm-hmm. But if you are vice president and you become the acting president,
you can still serve another term.
You can do another term. As I understand it, I'm no historian, but that's how I believe it works.
No one knows how the government works.
So every president is allowed 2 terms, but he didn't have a full term, right? Because he was the interim president under McKinley. And so that allowed him to run again down the road for a 3rd term, technically, but it would really be his second term where he was voted in by the people. All right. So what happens is, I'm just going to read from the book here because the book says it well. Roosevelt, one of the most popular presidents in his nation's history, had vowed never to run again after winning his 2nd term in the White House in 1904. But now, just 8 years later, he was not only running for a 3rd term, he was, to the horror and outrage of his old Republican backers, running as a third-party candidate against Democrats and Republicans alike. So this is a part in history where you could look at it a million ways, right? But you have your old guard Republican Party, which, if you know anything about the history with Roosevelt, they didn't like Roosevelt much. And this is where I draw some comparisons to Trump. Like the Republican Party, Trump's not exactly their guy. He's sort of this populist president that does whatever he wants for the people. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain part of the population that values him because he's not a total line
politician,
politician, party person. Mm-hmm. He's just a rogue. And then when you look at Theodore, there's a lot of similarities there. Theodore comes along and at first he's like, I'm not going to run again. After 4 years of Taft, William H. Taft, he was like, I hate that guy. He did not like Taft. I think Taft was like 300. He was 400, 300 something pounds.
Someone was big.
It was Taft. He's a fat dude. Theodore didn't like that. Didn't like that he wasn't a go-getter. He had lots of disparaging things to say about Taft. And he didn't like him as president. He didn't think he was doing a good job. So after Taft served 4 years, one term, Theodore's like, I'm coming back, guys. This is ridiculous. I want to be president again. And the Republican Party said, no, he's our incumbent. You know, he got in because of Theodore. And they're like, okay, now that he's in, you know, we want to keep him there, but we'll give you, wait 4 more years and then you'll be our next nominee. And Theodore's like, no, I want to do it now and it needs to happen. And this guy is a joke. And so they come to this impasse, and Woodrow Wilson is the Democratic candidate. Now, on his own, Woodrow Wilson is not likely to win, and there hasn't been a Democrat in the presidential seat for 16 years. Okay, so the Democrats are having a problem winning in the Electoral College and so forth. So Theodore is hugely famous, and so he says, look, I'm going to run. You either put me in as a Republican, as your nominee, or I'm going to run against you and burn the whole thing down.
Split the vote.
Split the vote. And then Woodrow Wilson will win. And the Republicans are like, you know, you better not. Good luck.
You better not.
And he's like, I'm going to. I'm telling you, I'm warning you now. And the Republicans, the old guard, they didn't want Theodore in. Theodore, he didn't do what they told him to do anyway. So they were like, well, they can control Taft. They can make Taft get him to do kind of what he wants them to do, but they couldn't get Theodore to do what they wanted him to do. So a lot of these guys, they don't want any more public land set aside for the public. They want that land mined for
the problem when
special
it's
interest
land,
groups.
Brian, is you can't sell it.
Yeah, they had all these things that Theodore got in the way of because he was really helping the American people and not helping special interest groups, not helping. So he had the politicians against him. So he's like, well, then if you don't do this, then I will run as an independent and I'll burn the whole thing down or I'll win, you know, one way or the other. So let's see what happened. Okay. Roosevelt's decision to abandon the Republican Party and run as a progressive had been bitterly criticized, not just because he was muddying the political waters, but because he still had a large and almost fanatically loyal following. Roosevelt was 5 feet 8 inches tall, Brent, about average height for an American man in the early 20th century, weighed more than 200 pounds, and had a voice that sounded as if he had just taken a sip of helium. But his outsized personality made him unforgettable and utterly irresistible. He delighted in leaning over the podium as though he were about to snatch his audience up by its collective collar. He talked fast, pounded his fist, waved his arms, and sent a current of electricity through the crowd. Such unbounded energy and vitality impressed one like the perennial forces of nature, the naturalist John Burroughs once wrote of Roosevelt. When he came into the room, it was as if a strong wind had blown the door open. Not surprisingly, Roosevelt was proving to be dangerous competition for the Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson, to say nothing of President William Howard Taft. The lackluster Republican incumbent who Roosevelt had handpicked to be his successor in the White House 4 years earlier was Taft. So it was a tough race. It was really close. And he was having a rally tonight hoping that he could garner just a few more votes and maybe pull this thing off. And it's kind of close. So before the doors opened to this rally that he's going to, more than 100,000 people were swarming the sidewalks and choking the surrounding cobblestone streets. Men and boys nimbly wove their way through the crowd, boldly hawking tickets in plain sight of 100 uniformed policemen. The scalpers had their work cut out for them, selling tickets in the churning throng. Days earlier, the Progressive Party, nicknamed the Bull Moose Party in honor of Theodore Roosevelt, had posted no more ticket sign, but brokers and street corner salesmen had continued to do brisk business. Dollar seats went for as much as $7 and roughly $130 in today's money. And the priciest tickets in the house could set the buyer back as much as $100. On the chaotic black market, however, even experienced con men could not be sure what they had actually bought. And it talks about how people bought tickets and then they're like, those are fake tickets.
Oh,
and
geez.
Some of them were really wealthy and famous people. And they're like, sorry, those aren't the real tickets. You have to leave.
No.
And they'd escort him. So this was a huge, huge event. 200,000 people, or no, more than 100,000 people swarming sidewalks out there to join into this last campaign rally. It's a big campaign rally. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many show up today.
A lot.
100,000?
Well, it depends on who you're going to go see.
Right. So anyway, more than 200 people tried to make it into the arena by bypassing the line and driving to the gate in a hired carriage or one of Henry Ford's open-air Model Ts. But the tactic didn't work for everyone. Even Roosevelt's own sister, Corinne, was turned away at the gate. She caught up in the moment. The 51-year-old Corinne finally made it into the arena by climbing a fire escape.
It's my kind of girl.
Yeah, those Roosevelts, they find a way.
Oh, man.
So Theodore Roosevelt, the object of the furor, had nearly as much trouble trying to get into Madison Square Garden as his sister. So he fights to get into this arena to give his speech. And all this is just to say that he was absolutely adored and that there were people in love with this president and wanted to see him win. And I don't think that in today's period we've had a president, it's been a long time since we've had a president that was this universally adored in America. He had his detractors on the Democrat side, especially over the Booker T. Washington affair. You had some real racist Democrats that were completely dead set against him becoming president. You had a whole bunch of KKK Dems that were really fighting the Republican Party in general. And so it was, he didn't have that vote. The South, he had a hard time with the South. But the rest of America pretty much universally loves him. And you'll see when the vote comes in how that works out. Inside the auditorium, Edith Roosevelt, every inch the aristocrat, with her softly cleft chin and long, elegant neck, was seated in a box above the fray when a mighty roar rose up from the audience, heralding her husband's entrance. 4 colossal American flags greeted Roosevelt, waving grandly from the girded ceiling, and an entire massive bull moose stood mounted on a pedestal and bathed in a white spotlight, its head raised high, its ears erect, as if about to charge. There's a picture of your president right there, bull moose. Roosevelt, still famously energetic at 54, so he's 54 years old, greeted his admirers with characteristic vigor, pumping his left arm in the air like a windmill. His right arm, however, hung motionless at his side. The last time Roosevelt had given a speech, just 2 weeks earlier in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, he had been shot in the chest by a 36-year-old New York bartender named John Schrank, a Bavarian immigrant who feared that Roosevelt's run for a third term was an effort to establish a monarchy in the United States. Incredibly, Roosevelt's heavy army overcoat and the folded 50-page manuscript and steel spectacle case he carried in his right breast pocket had saved his life. But the bullet had plunged some 5 inches deep, lodging near his rib cage. That night, whether out of an earnest desire to deliver his message or merely an egotist's love of drama, Roosevelt had insisted on delivering his speech to a terrified and transfixed audience. This is like a week earlier. His coat unbuttoned to reveal a blood-stained shirt and his speech held high so that all could see the 2 sinister-looking holes made by the assailant's bullet. Roosevelt had shouted, "It takes more than that to kill a bull moose." So, he's been shot in the chest, and he continued his speech. I was reading this to my kids last night, and I go, it makes perfect sense to me. Like, I would totally deliver that speech. Like, I got shot, but it didn't work. They got the guy. There's no way I'm leaving. You guys all came to see the speech.
What's insane, okay, the fact that he got shot with a bullet and then got up and gave the speech is crazy. What impresses me even more is how he handled the entire situation. Like, he saved Schrank's life. Like, people were getting ready to, they were going to tear him apart, on sight, dude. He just shot the president.
Right.
We Americans don't really like that. Even if we don't like the president, we're not cool with that.
Yeah.
He's getting ready to be ripped apart, and Theodore stands up and backs everyone off. Says, don't hurt him. Leave him unmolested. And he says, I want to talk to him. And so you know what he asked the dude?
No.
What do you have to say for yourself? like
like a scolding father.
100%. Like he's got like pyre on his mouth. What do you have to say for yourself, Billy? Like, and the guy doesn't say anything. And then he asks him, what did you do it for? And then Schrank never responds to him. And he's like, oh, what's the use? Turn him over to the police. And then he gives instructions to the police not to hurt him. It's the only reason that dude is alive. 100%. And then he looked at him and said, you poor creature. Like, that's some insight right there.
Yeah. It turns out Schrank was an immigrant, really poor Bavarian immigrant.
He came over with his parents when he was really young. They both died.
He was a little crazy.
Well, then he went and lived with his aunt and uncle. And then when he was a young teenager, they died.
Didn't they put him in an insane asylum or something? Or
After he shot them.
After he shot
the president.
Yeah.
But Schrank had a bad life, dude. He had two sets of parents basically died. Then he had a girlfriend he was pretty much engaged to. And then she died on a wheelboat.
It does show some compassion in Theodore Roosevelt that he didn't just want to see the man murdered or killed. You know, that he looked at the person and was like, man, I'm glad I was blessed. Like there's a certain amount of gratitude he has for the life he has looking at this man. I don't think he said it out of a disdain, but more out of pity.
It's 100% out of pity. Like, you don't call someone you poor creature angrily, I feel. And not only that, but like, if someone shot me and I managed to get back up, I don't think I would take pity on them or call them a poor creature. I'd have some other words I'd call them, but I don't know if I would have any empathy within me.
Dude, you can see the bullet in these photos in this book that's lodged in his chest, and it's right into the rib.
And it's not a small bullet. It's a 38 special. Brian, that's like the size of my thumb.
Right.
That's a big bullet.
Well, it went it says that it went 5 inches. So it went through his thick army coat and then through a 50-page paper manuscript, that was folded, and then into his spectacle case. And I don't know what that was made out of exactly. Metal.
It was a metal spectacle case.
And then it passed through all of that, and then it went into his body.
And it's not nice paper. It's not going to be nice thin paper. I doubt they had nice paper like we have now.
Yeah.
I bet you it's thicker.
I mean, it looks thick, like a Bible. I mean, it's thick. You can see in this photo that it's thick. It's 50 pages. It's like shooting through this.
Do you know what the speech was called?
This section of this book right here.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's thick. I mean, he was a dead man. Had it not hit him there,
a couple inches either way. Yeah, for sure.
It almost, it really does make you think, in some ways, providence, some kind of divine intervention, right?
That's why we have breast pockets on over our hearts, right? 100%. That's the reason why it's there, not over on our right.
That's wild. Wow.
Do you know what the title of his speech was?
No.
A progressive cause greater than any individual.
Well, he ran as an independent, which they call the Progressive Party.
Yep.
But it was basically him saying,
Screw
you to the Democratic and the Republican Party and the two-party system and the corruption that was in it, that he saw on both sides, and how he was like, you know what? We need our own party that works for the people. Now, it wasn't like Theodore was without his faults. There was a stubbornness to him when he felt like he was morally right, and a bit of a dictatorness to him, where he kind of just steamrolled the rules or went around them in some fashion.
I feel he had a healthy disregard for the rules.
Yeah, and that could destabilize a democracy. Thankfully, he never went too far with it, and it was always in some kind of very inspired way to save animals or nature. Like I said, divine providence, maybe perhaps there was a role for him to play to shape the rest of America.
What did he say about after he got shot? What was his reasoning for feeling that he was physically capable of giving the talk? What did he say?
He just said it takes more than that to kill a bull moose.
No.
He said Roosevelt insisted on giving his speech still wearing the bloody shirt and with the bullet lodged 5 inches deep in his chest. It wasn't 5 inches into his chest, but it was through 5 inches of material and then lodged in his chest.
Yeah. It's basically in his rib cage, just floating above his lungs.
Here's a picture. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on the video.
I can find some pictures and I'll superimpose it if you guys are watching.
But if you're watching, you can see the shirt that's all bloody. You see the manuscript and you see the the spectacle case. So he shot. That shirt is bloody. There's a lot of he's bleeding all over. It's funny when I read it to the kids though, I was like, dude, it doesn't make any sense to me that you wouldn't give the speech. Because Suzanne's like, he's crazy. I go, I would totally do that. And my kids are like, oh yeah, you would. Yeah. I was like, yeah. And then for those that don't know, I got bit by this dog, big giant dog, happened to be my dog. And
he had some issues.
160-pound mastiff, and he drugged me a little bit.
He was only 160?
Yeah, but all muscle. Anyway, he bit me. I was trying to be careful when you try to split up a dog fight, especially when you have two, 200-pound like dogs.
Chicks in heat, man. They were not
So
happy.
I got in the mix. I was pissed, and the dog grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me. And then I stood up and I was like, get off me, get over here. And it was sort of this standoff. I'm not going to lie.
You couldn't back down?
No. It was
at that point, you can show no fear.
It was fake it. It was get angry.
And hope he doesn't bite your
and
throat
hope
out.
he decides to back off, It was just who was more alpha. He clearly displayed quite a bit of his own. Finally, after he stood up to me, we're growling at me. I'm growling at him, basically, and I didn't back off. But I didn't really have any tools at my disposal to have defended against him if something happened.
You had a broom, didn't you?
No, I broke it over the other dog's head. So anyway, folks, it was a crap show. Anyway, he finally was like, all right, and I shoot him off, and he went into his kennel, and I locked the door. But I was bleeding like out my ankle and
crazy,
and all over the floor. And I walked into the house, but I was in the middle of cooking a ribeye steak and mashed potatoes, and I had just finished intense CrossFit work, and I was hungry. So I sat down and I'm eating, and there's blood all over the kitchen floor and flowing.
Did your wife come in on that?
Yeah, she's like, "We got to get to the hospital. We got to get to the hospital." And I showed her. I pulled my leg up and took the shoe off. I'm like, it'll be fine. And I kept eating the steak. And I got some ice cream out, and I was just eating, and the kids are like traumatized.
Look, I've eaten in hospitals lots. They don't got good food, and you're going to be there for a minute.
Yeah, I'm like, this is going to take a while. I'm not going to go until I've enjoyed my steak.
They're going to have to clean the foot. They're going to have to put stitches in it.
it all, and I'm doing the whole thing. And anyway, we finish about a half hour, 40 minutes later, and I get dressed, and I drive to the hospital. Then I get down there, and they're like, and you can see the main artery that goes through your ankle.
You could touch it.
And it's nicked, and it's like about to break, and it's just like pulsing, and they're like, if that had gone, you might have died. You might have just bled out,
Just put your foot on the table.
I was like, whatever. And then they named like 4 or 5 other times where I've been severely injured, and I'm like, it can wait. I got things to do.
I was in the middle of something.
I'm going to finish this, and an hour later, then I go, and they're like, getting it treated is like, it's not going to get a whole lot worse between now and then. And if I have something I'm working on, I don't want to leave it. I remember that time I hit myself in the head with a fence pounder, T-post pounder.
How did that happen?
I don't know if anybody is. So I know
what you're talking about.
I was building the fence for a pasture. And we had some mules and stuff. Yeah. And so I was pounding in some T-fence for this non-climb 6-foot wire fencing that we were putting around the perimeter of the property. And so the post was tall. I think it was like an 8-foot post or something. So getting it started was rough. You almost had to stand on a bucket, to get the pole.
Yeah. You'd get the post hole over to drive
So
it.
those that don't know, it's a metal cylinder, and the top of the metal cylinder is filled with like concrete, and the bottom, like a toilet paper roll, the bottom is open, and it slides over the metal post, and it's got 2 handles on each side.
It's a giant heavy pipe.
Sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And you slide it up the T-post, and then you bring it down, boom, and it drives in the post into the ground so you can build your fence. And I had taken telephone poles and dug like 6-foot holes for each of those. Those were the corner posts, and then concrete in there, and then T-posts in between. And I slid that pole up, and every time you drive the pole into the ground, it goes down 3-4 inches, and it's getting shorter and shorter. Well, this was one of my last poles to put in. I've been working hard for like morning to sun up, sun up to sundown. I slide that pole up, the T-post driver. I slide it up. Well, the pole had gotten shorter because I had driven it in further. And then when I came down, I slid it off the T-post when it came off. It didn't stay inside. And then when I came down, I clipped the edge of the T-post.
Oh, and it just...
And I brought the full weight smashing down on my head.
Oh, that could kill you.
Like someone took a sledgehammer and just went and cracked me over the head. And it came down and it hit me, and I just was like...
Out.
It was the most shocking, intense...
It wouldn't even hurt. It would just be like, you wouldn't even know where you are or what happened.
It hit me so... I have a really hard head, apparently. And the T-post, as soon as it hit my head, I fell to my knees. Poof. I'm on my knees, and I'm trying not to fall over and trying not to pass out, just trying to stay awake at all costs. And I'm on my knees, and everything's just limp, and I'm like, ugh, just trying to stay there. And Mark Brownlee is standing there next to me, and he's just shocked. And I'm just like trying to stay alive, just like sitting there, and I'm just like trying not to pass out. And then I finally started to be able to see a little bit, and then I was about to vomit, just puke my guts out, and I was like, breathe, don't puke, just sit there. And so I sat there for a few, and after about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, I was like, hey, I feel all right, I feel okay. I mean, there's blood and stuff.
Concussion, not a big deal, folks.
Yeah, so I was like, hey, maybe this didn't kill me, So then I got in the car and we went to the hospital. But first I wanted to get something to eat, and then we went. And turned out I had a concussion, but it was all right. I hit my head with Tanis and Dorn, too, when I fell off that horse in BC and landed on a rock. That stunned me. And one time I dove off a cliff, and there was a pier sticking up into the water. And I dove head first, and my head smashed into the rocks. I've hit my head out quite a few times, and everything seems to be all right.
Yeah, if you are about to vomit, or if you vomit immediately after a head injury, that is a very bad sign.
Yeah, just
brain cells were lost for sure. We'll check that box.
Anyway,
death might be following. Don't sleep.
Anyway, folks, Roosevelt is shot, and it doesn't kill him. He's 54 years old. He finishes his speech. A week later, here he is. He's getting ready to deliver his speech. Now, he can't raise his right arm because
you need to bring up the fact that he was not coughing blood, and that's why he felt safe to
That's right.
My favorite line.
He said, so when he decided to resume his speech,
which people were greatly against.
Yeah, they thought he's going to die. He's like, look, I'm not coughing up blood. So it didn't pierce
the prereq.
It didn't pierce my lung, so it's just in my muscle tissue.
And he knows that because he's an avid hunter.
Right. And so he's like,
wasn't lung shot.
He also fought in war too.
Rough Rider.
And so he saw some people die and get shot and all of that. So, he was no stranger to that. So back to the book. So Roosevelt still had one of Schrank's bullets in his chest. At 10:30 p.m., pounding on the flag-draped desk in front of him and nervously snapping his jaws, he finally convinced the crowd that he was in earnest, and the hall slowly quieted. Unaided by a loudspeaker, an invention that would revolutionize public speaking, the following year, he began his speech. So he gives this speech, and it says in here, he didn't attack his opponents. He really just talked about his own agenda and what he wanted to do for America. He said, our creed is one that bids us to be just to all, to feel sympathy for all, and to strive for an understanding of the needs of all. Our purpose is to smite down wrong. To the people in the hall and to millions of Americans, Roosevelt was a hero, a leader, an icon. But even as he stood on the stage at Madison Square Garden, he knew that in 6 days he would lose not only the election, but also his bright, unblinking spotlight. He would be reviled by many and then ignored by all, and that would be the worst death he could imagine. He said, I know the American people, he said prophetically in 1910, upon returning to a hero's welcome after an epic journey to Africa. They have a way of erecting a triumphal arch, and after the conquering hero has passed beneath it, he may expect to receive a shower of bricks on his back at any moment. That is just like any politician or you serve the people in any political capacity. You're the hero when things are good. You're the absolute worst piece of garbage when things don't go well. You own the love and the hate when you're put in the position of that kind of power.
Worst job ever.
Yeah, I don't want it.
I don't get it.
I've heard Joe Rogan talk about that job. Worst job ever. No,
Worst
why would anybody
job ever? Why would you ever want that? People are trying to kill you 24/7. Case in point, nobody likes you. Like, even if you're doing a good job, people are still going to be mad at you.
They loved him, no doubt. One of the most popular in U.S. history. But like the book said, he more or less knew he probably wasn't. They're doing the polling, right? So they're kind of guessing where it's going to be. And you're splitting the vote, right? You're taking the Republican vote and you're saying, okay, we're going to split this. Your Democrat Party doesn't have anything to split, right? They're all intact. You're going to have some moderates, I think, that are going to leave the Democrat Party and maybe vote for the independent, which was Roosevelt. But he'd have to win a lot, and that'd be tough. He was more or less just going to split the Republican Party, which was pretty much guaranteed to win again. Mm-hmm. And this is how it turns out. It says that on Election Day, November 5, 1912, Roosevelt's grim expectations about his candidacy were realized in full. What happened is Woodrow Wilson won, winning 2.2 million more votes. So there was 15 million votes cast. Basically, the Democrats won. But if you took the combined votes between Taft and Roosevelt, they would have beat the Democrats if all those votes had just gone to one. But he smoked Taft. Taft wasn't even in the race. Taft was a joke. He got a fraction of the votes. So it was really between Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson.
I'm kind of low-key reading his progressive cause greater than any individual. Mm-hmm. He actually wasn't able to, sorry for interrupting, folks, but he wasn't actually able to give the speech because he was shot and blood's all over the back half of it. So it's impromptu, and it's really good, but there's this line. It says, "Now, friends, I am not speaking for myself at all. I give you my word. I do not care a rap about being shot. Not a rap." I don't know what a rap is.
I'm pretty sure you could replace that with a lot of things. Yeah.
I wonder if
I don't give a crap.
We should read this at some point for people to listen to.
Yeah,
I
would like
really
that.
Great.
It goes in to say, I'll read this a little bit here. For Roosevelt, who was not used to losing, even his victory over Taft was cold comfort. He had long ago lost his respect for the 300-pound president, dismissing him as a flub dub with a streak of the second rate and the common in him.
They had better insults back then.
That was a class, like, with a streak of the second rate and the common in him. Don't be common.
Uh-huh. My wife's family's from England.
Right.
And they say that. Don't be common.
Right.
Like,
right.
That's an insult.
You kind of know what he means, though. Like, someone who just wants to coast, do the minimum, not very smart, capable, whatever.
Someone who's
He didn't like him. He did not like him. And it says, besides, everyone knew that Taft hadn't really been in the race from the beginning. Before the Republican convention, even Taft's own wife, the fiercely ambitious Nellie, had told him, "I suppose you will have to fight Mr. Roosevelt for the nomination, and if you get it, he will defeat you."
Savage.
From his own wife. And this is where Roosevelt was angry with the Republican Party. He's like, if I run, we win. 100% we win. The Dems don't win.
Yep.
You run Taft, nobody likes this guy. He's not very good. And so when they ran for it and he tried to become the nominee, she's like, look, you're going to fight Roosevelt for this. If you get the nomination, she's like, he'll beat you. He'll beat you.
Yep.
You got to wonder on all sides, there was a lot of stubbornness. Now, as a result of this event, Roosevelt is despised by much of the Republican Party. They're angry. They're bitter, especially, the old guard, all of the people that he was working with before. They're like, you cost us this election. And from Roosevelt's perspective, he's like, I warned you. I told you to put me in as the nominee. You gave it to Taft. He was a bum. And
no, Brian, he was a flub dub.
A flub dub, right? So it says that Nellie was right on both counts. Roosevelt had at first vied for the Republican nomination, and when party bosses ensured Taft's victory, he had struck back by ensuring their defeat in the general election. As a third-party candidate, Roosevelt could not count on winning, but he certainly could spoil. When backed by a united Republican Party in his earlier election bids, Roosevelt had swept easily to victory over the Democrats. By turning his enormous popularity against his former party, however, he merely split the Republican vote and handed the election to Wilson, a widely predicted result that, when it came to pass, provoked bitter criticism of his tactics. Someone wrote, Roosevelt goes down to personal and richly deserved defeat. He has the satisfaction of knowing that by giving vent to his insatiate ambition and deplorable greed for power, he has elevated the Democratic Party to the control of the nation.
Well, I think you could just flip that script and say they did the exact same thing.
Right. I know. It kind of depends on. Yeah. So Roosevelt keeps it private, but this is a hard loss for him. He really struggles with it. And to the public, he said, I accept the result with entire good humor and contentment. Jolly good run, but didn't work out. But the result was, the truth was, in private, he said he was surprised by how shaken he was by the defeat.
And what does he do, Brian, when he's stressed out?
He goes on an epic crusade.
He runs to the woods.
He goes to the woods. He
The more stressed out, the more epic the adventure has to be.
He's larger than life, right? And here's a man who served as president, was a Rough Rider, served in war, went on some epic expeditions, was in Africa and other places. And here he is at this point in his life where he's larger than life. And he's like, he's dealing with this bitter defeat and the sorrow from it.
He had the balls to name his son Kermit. Do you know what kind of person you have to be to name your kid Kermit? You have to be confident that guy's going to be a badass.
Yeah. Well, it goes on to say that they just trashed him after that. Mm-hmm. High society, the Republican Party.
We lost because of you.
All the people in power. He was a populist. The people loved him. But the people in power, the Republican Guard and the Democrat, they wanted him gone, right?
It's weird how that works, so that people can love you, but the people in charge hate your guts.
Yeah, because
you're a good person.
Oh, you're just going against, the
quo.
Yeah, the status quo, I think. So Roosevelt spent that winter hunkered down at Sagamore Hill with his wife and their young daughter, Ethel. He took walks with Edith, answered letters, and worked quietly in his book-lined study. He had few interruptions. The telephone, which had rung like sleigh bells all day and night, was now silent. So he has to deal with this, and they said that basically that Colonel Roosevelt was outside the pale. He had done the unforgivable thing. He had turned against his class. So you still have some vestiges from the British background, England, where you have people who have class and that are in different levels, stratuses of society, and they're like, you turned against your class. Basically, by being a populist, going kind of against the party and all the people that are in power and trying to, run as an independent and do it your way. You betrayed those that you shouldn't have, and there's a lot of bitterness here. And so they try to shame him for the loss. He goes through a lot of, heartache, and the loss and disappointment were tough. It says if rejection was new to Roosevelt, which this was new, loss and disappointment were not. Although he was 54 years old, only 54, he had already lived an extraordinarily full life. Perhaps even more striking than the peaks and valleys of Roosevelt's life was the clear relationship between those extremes. The ex-president's habit of seeking solace from heartbreak and frustration by striking out on even more difficult and unfamiliar terrain and finding redemption by pushing himself to his outermost limits. When confronted with sadness or setbacks that were beyond his power to overcome, Roosevelt instinctively sought out still greater tests, losing himself in punishing physical hardship and danger, experiences that came to shape his personality and inform his most impressive achievements. The impulse to defy hardship became a fundamental part of Roosevelt's character, honed from his earliest childhood. Frail and sickly as a child and plagued by life-threatening asthma, Roosevelt forced himself into a regimen of harsh physical exercise in an effort to conquer his weakness. His sister Corinne remembered her brother as a fragile, patient sufferer, struggling with the effort to breathe. But before Theodore had reached adolescence, he had already resolved to free himself from invalidism and frailty.
Invalidism.
Through what Corinne described as regular monotonous motion, swinging from horizontal bars, struggling with heavy, awkward barbells, Teedy, as his family called him, slowly broadened his chest, strengthened his arms, and transformed himself into a young man whose body was as strong and sure as his mind.
What did they call him?
TD.
TD.
Teddy. TD. TD. That was his nickname. He's a little kid. Although it was Theodore's own iron discipline that brought about this transformation, it was his father's encouragement that sparked his resolve. Theodore Sr. loomed large in the lives of all his children, but for his older son, he was idol, hero, and savior. One of my memories, Roosevelt wrote later in life, is of my father walking up and down the room with me in his arms at night when I was a very small person, and of sitting up in bed gasping, with my father and mother trying to help me. Desperate for their child to breathe, Theodore and Martha Roosevelt tried anything, making TD drink strong black coffee, forcing him to vomit by coaxing syrup of ipecac down his throat, or hovering over him while he miserably smoked a cigar. Finally, Theodore Sr. sat his son down and told him that he had the power to change his fate, but he would have to work hard to do it. Theodore, you have the mind, but you have not the body. And without the help of the body, the mind cannot go as far as it should. You must make your body. It is hard drudgery to make one's body, but I know you will do it. TD, then only about 11 years old, flashed his famous teeth and, accepting the challenge, cried, I'll make my body. Roosevelt did make his body, and he never again allowed it to grow weak or idle. On the contrary, what began as drudgery soon became a compulsion. Throughout his adult life, Roosevelt would relish physical exertion, and he would use it not just as a way to keep his body fit and his mind sharp, but as his most effective weapon against depression and despair. I think that's critical. Like, first of all, I think this story, there's so much to unpack here, because you have a young man that is not blessed with physical strength. You know, he weak and fragile body. And his father's like, look, you have a strong mind, you have a great mind, but it can't go very far unless it has a body to go with it. Mm-hmm. And you could have a strong body, but you're going to have to just work for it. And he decides, okay, I'll do that. I'll make my body. And at first it's hard and he's weak, but then he does. He eventually becomes a very strong and tough man. And then later in life, he relies on it as his most effective weapon against depression and despair. There are a lot of folks out there that struggle with nihilism and sorrow and sadness and what's the point of life and depression and despair. And one of the first things that a lot of doctors will say is exercise. Move your body, exercise. And you can see how for Theodore, it was, okay, I'm going to get out and I'm going to go on some kind of adventure. I'm going to unplug. I'm going to go and I'm going to get out and I'm going to do something. And that was his effective weapon, you know. Mm-hmm. So the fitness kept his mind sharp, kept his body strong, kept him healthy. And then it allowed him to go outside and fight depression through those outdoor activities.
I have this theory from an evolutionary standpoint. We as human beings are not meant to be able to think about our problems as much as we are capable of now.
Yeah.
Because forever, our daily lives were consumed with getting food and surviving. We didn't have time to really think about it, so our bodies and our brains never really developed or evolved to handle the mental stress that we have nowadays.
I think we make up causes and stress because we don't do anything.
It's because we evolved to constantly be looking for it.
And to conquer challenges, to overcome, to survive. But there aren't any.
Mm-hmm. We've conquered it all. And we did a really good job.
So what happens is people, I think, lack purpose. Mm-hmm. They lack a lot of challenge. And so then they make up causes, social justice causes often to give their life some meaning.
They need some Jesus.
So that would help. It says, at Harvard, Roosevelt grew steadily stronger and more vigorous and finally outpaced his asthma. He even began boxing, starting with lessons and working his way to matches. Early in 1879, he won his first boxing match and made a name for himself at campus, which we covered in an earlier podcast. One of his classmates wrote this: when the referee called time, Roosevelt immediately dropped his hands, but the other man dealt him a savage blow on the face, at which we all shouted, "Foul, foul," and hissed. But Roosevelt turned towards us and cried out, "Hush," he didn't hear. A chivalrous act which made him immediately popular. I think it was also genuine. I don't think he did it because he wanted to be popular. He did it because
It was the right
he
thing
had
to do.
compassion for the person. And I think, you know, when he got shot and he shrank, he prevented people from tearing him to pieces.
The guy's name, Shrank.
Mm-hmm.
That's a villain name right there.
So it goes on to say, during his sophomore year at Harvard, his father, the best man I ever knew, died from stomach cancer at the age of 46.
Oh, geez.
Blindsided, Roosevelt reeled from the great loss of his young life. If I had very much time to think, he wrote in his diary, I believe I should go crazy. So again, instead of just sitting there and like you said, thinking about it all, he went out and got himself busy. After his father's funeral, Roosevelt fought back. Upon finishing the school year, he went to Oyster Bay to wrestle with his grief and anger in seclusion in the mountains. In the small, heavily wooded village where his family had long spent their summers, he swam, hiked, hunted, and thundered through the forest on his horse Lightfoot, riding so hard that he nearly destroyed her. Then, before returning to Harvard, he disappeared into the Maine wilderness with an Ursine backwoodsman, Bill Sewall. Look out for Theodore, a doctor traveling with Roosevelt advised Sewall. He's not strong, but he's all grit. He'll kill himself before he'll even say he's tired. Man after my own heart. Roosevelt emerged from that summer determined to survive any loss, and loss would come. Following his father's death, Roosevelt had a string of successes. He graduated from Harvard with honors, married Alice Lee, a pretty blonde who he was certain would never have him. But he insisted, I am going to have her, and at 23 was elected New York State's youngest assemblyman. In 1884, however, when he was only 25 years old, Roosevelt was called home by an ominous telegram. When he arrived, he found that the two most important women in his life, his mother and his young wife, were dying. At 3 a.m. on February 14, Valentine's Day, Martha Roosevelt, still a vibrant, dark-haired Southern belle at 46, died of typhoid fever. 11 hours later, her daughter-in-law, Alice Lee Roosevelt, who had given birth to Theodore's first child just 2 days before, succumbed to Bright's disease, a kidney disorder. That night, in his diary, Roosevelt marked the date with a large black X and a single anguished entry. The light has gone out of my life. Desperate to conquer his despair, Roosevelt resorted to the only therapy he knew, physical hardship and danger. He left his infant daughter with his sister Anna and boarded a train for the Dakota Badlands, where he hoped to find the kind of hard existence that might keep his body and mind too busy to ache for Alice. Roosevelt rarely spoke about that terrible night or about his first wife. Even to their daughter, who was named for their mother, she would never know. He was a different man when he finally returned east for good 2 years later. He was filled with vigor and perspective, and after mastering an entirely unfamiliar world of danger on the American frontier and defeating by sheer energy and physical exertion the grief that had threatened to overwhelm him, black care, he explained in a rare unguarded comment on the subject, rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough. That's a good quote. I need that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Black care rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough. Again, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. You know, he's battling the loss. These are huge losses at 20, 22, 24, 25 years old. That's a very tough time in life to lose a counselor, a father, you know, your mother, first your father, 2 years later, your mother and your wife that you adore. He loved his wife, adored her. All of it gone, just like that. He could easily succumb to that sorrow, drink alcohol, give into an addiction, turn to carnal pleasures to fill the void, blame other people, and curse God, curse existence. It's very easy to turn to a life of bitterness. But what does Theodore do? Instead, strenuous activity. He gets into physical exercise. He gets into exploring the world. He gets into there's something, Brent, when I go into the mountains and I've hiked all day and I've had to ferry my water, get my water from a river here and there. I'm just trying to get enough food, water, and shelter every day and trying to find the elk or the deer or the bear, or whatever I'm after every day. There's no time. Every day is full of work and strenuous activity. And there's the goal and your folks, there's not a lot of time. And when you're on the stock, It's like everything else in the world disappears. You're in that moment. Everything is on that moment. Mm-hmm. You and that animal are locked in a battle here. And you're so busy and you're so strenuous and you're just trying to meet some simple, basic needs all day long, every day. There is something restorative about it. There's something that heals the mind and the body, the spirit. Black care rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough. He says, the book says, black care again descended on Roosevelt in 1909, the year he left the White House. It was a transition that was entirely of his making. He had inherited his first term after William McKinley's assassination in 1901, and so could easily have run again 7.5 years later. But giving up the presidency left him feeling empty and adrift. Though he had done great things during his 2 presidential terms, from negotiating an end to the Russo-Japanese War to making possible the construction of the Panama Canal, Roosevelt felt that he had not had an opportunity for greatness. Of course, a man has to take advantage of his opportunities, but the opportunities have to come, he told an audience in Cambridge, England in the spring of 1910. If there is not the war, you don't get the great general. If there is not the great occasion, you don't get the great statesman. If Lincoln had lived in times of peace, no one would know his name now. The disappointment of stepping down before he was ready, before he had been tested by some cataclysmic event, was so great that 2 days before leaving office, Roosevelt had admonished his friend Paul Martin, "My dear fellow, for heaven's sake, don't talk about my having a future. My future is in the past." As difficult as Roosevelt's departure from the White House had been, however, it was mild compared to the pain of his electoral defeat in 1912. His second wife, Edith, who had known her husband her entire life, had witnessed firsthand his reactions to sorrow and disappointment. She could not have doubted what now lay in store. It was just a matter of time before Roosevelt would break away again, and there was nothing she could do to prevent it. Edith was a private person, and her quiet life at Sagamore Hill was precious to her. But she knew that it was not for Theodore. He would not rest until he found some physically punishing adventure that would take him far, far from home, and Edith feared to place him in grave danger. So that's podcast 1 from the River of Doubt, setting the stage. You can see how he has used strenuous life, the outdoors, these activities of turning to the wild. And he's always been a naturalist. Like we covered that in an earlier podcast. Like he's obsessed with animals and nature, and there's something for him in that as well. And by going out there and being in nature, he's able to overcome these moments of sorrow. But here he is. He's struggling with what's going on here, losing this, and he's haunted by the things he could have done. And I'll say this, Brent, I think some of the greatest men in the world are the men that are haunted by what they could have done but didn't get done. Despite the fact of what they did was monumental. It's like it's never enough. There's always that insatiable drive to accomplish more and even greater purpose and deeds, and you know what I mean? And so he's sitting there going, yeah, I was president for 2 terms and I got some things done and we did this and we did
Served
that.
in the army. I was a general or whatever.
But
colonel.
I never really got, I'm not done yet. Like there's still greater work to do. And not taking that 3rd term was something he kind of regretted. In some ways, it makes me think of, I watched that documentary with Michael Jordan, the Last Dance documentary that came out during the whole China virus.
The Kung flu?
The China virus. During this whole China virus thing, they came out with that documentary on Michael Jordan, and you're like, okay, he got 3 championships, and then he went and played baseball, and then he got 3 more championships in a row.
He was also in Space Jam. Don't forget that.
Right there was that epic show.
He hung out with the Looney Tunes,
and then but the question at the end of it was, do you wonder? Could you have gone 7, 8? Like, do you wonder?
Could Space Jam have been a trilogy? I often wonder that.
That pretty much highlights your generation compared to my generation in relation to Jordan. But I sat there and they were asking him that. And yeah, you could see it haunted him. It haunted Michael. He's like, yeah, I got 6 championships, 2 3-peats, right? Like, but the question haunts him, like, what if he hadn't quit at that point? What if he had stayed? What might his legacy be? The following 2, 3, 4, because he retired. Then he came back like 3 or 4 years later or 5 years later as a Washington Wizard, and he still crushed it. But it's like, and he was an effective player then. But it makes you, everyone wonders. The whole team, he wonders. It haunts him to this day. And I think the same thing with Roosevelt. He's like, I had the 3rd term if I wanted it. It was in my hand. It was mine for the taking. And there was so much more I could have done in that position, of so much more of this. But I think Michael and Theodore were tired, dude. It takes so much effort to run at that pace for that many years in a row. I think one of the reasons that he went ahead, I mean, the team fell apart because ownership and things like that. But I think it's like, well, Michael could have stayed. They could have found a way, but they kind of stubbornly were like, it is what it is. Years ago, I interviewed Chris Spieler, CrossFit Games, ex-CrossFit Games athlete, friend of ours. And I admire Chris because he's like this tiny dude that just
the Mighty Mouse,
unstoppable man. And some of those things I saw him do just were awe-inspiring, beating guys like twice his strength and size. And he was on a podcast once and he said to me, I'm haunted by what if. Like, I never want to go, well, what if? What if I had done this? What if I had tried? And so he worked really hard to not leave those what ifs out there. And I think Michael Jordan was like, what if? Haunts him to this day. I think,
what if will keep you up at night?
I think Theodore Roosevelt, what if? What if I hadn't squandered that 3rd term of the presidency?
Gosh,
What if?
It's a terrible job.
I agree. But I think the thing is the thing to remind yourself is that if you're in that position, you pushed yourself so hard. Don't, as hard as it is, be careful about being satisfied. Because 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years later, you could say, man, what if? What if? The same is true on a hunt. Like last year, I almost went home on my elk hunt. Solo, by myself, I almost went home. Victory was just the difference between coming home and having a completely different season or year versus staying there and killing a big herd bull. The what if is the part that haunted me. Like, okay, I have like 3 or 4 days left before the season ends.
Well, you kind of whiffed it because your sight was messed up. You had a bull dead to rights.
I had multiple opportunities that I did not capitalize on. Yes. But that didn't make staying all the more easier. It made it harder. There's a part of me that was like, dude, you did your best, man. You just got some tough breaks. But I'm older now. I'm like, no. What if? I'll stay till the last hour, the last moment, because this time comes around once a year. September,
I would say
tag in
probably
my pocket.
3/4 of the animals that I've seen you shoot have all been near or at last light
Or
on the last day.
That just goes to show, though, like my attitude was, and there definitely were, don't get me wrong, there were a couple of days where I was like, you know what? It's 3 hours before dark. I might find a bull right now, but I'm going to hit the tent. It's raining hard. I'm done. Maybe I would have killed a bull that night, but it's a long game. I'm like I'm here for 6 more days or 5 more days. I got to pace it somewhat. But
Yeah, they want to go to bed wet and cold.
The point
sleep
was not to go home, not to be faced with a what if, what would have happened if I had just stuck it out, and, you think about those moments, there is a mental component, toughness to that, where you're just like, you've committed. It's easier said than done, But I've never done anything as difficult as a 3-peat championship in the NBA or something like Theodore Roosevelt has done. running that hard for 8 years, 2 terms as president, and getting as many things done as he did. He's on Mount Rushmore for a reason. So I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying even him, some of the greatest, I think, often look back and it was never enough. They always wonder, like, what if? So the goal in life is to have as few what ifs as possible. I'll share something real quick. Some people know this, some people don't. When I had started the podcast and it was rocking pretty good, I ditched work. I didn't tell my boss I was working from home, but I was like, dude, I'm going to go to the Hunt Expo and I'm going to interview a bunch of people. I did the ATA show and then I did the Hunt Expo. Just so happened that Cameron Haynes had been walking the floor and Joe Rogan was with Cam and they were both walking the floor. They had just got done. Rogan was in town skiing for vacation. But he secretly wanted to come to the Western Hunt Expo, I think. So he ditched his wife and kids and he came to the Hunt Expo. And anyway, he'd been listening to the Gritty podcast for a while because there weren't a lot of podcasts at the time and he was into hunting. So he was kind of following along and he's really into archery and we were covering a lot of archery. So I meet Cam, I meet Rogan. I knew Cam already. So I'm like, hey, Cam, how's it going? Hi, Joe. And I don't want to ask Joe Rogan to be on my podcast.
5 feet behind you, Brian has the podcast studio basically set up.
Right. I mean, it's ready to rock. It's ready to rock. Throw on a headset. Let's talk. There's a few moments in life. It was kind of larger than life for me as a podcaster, and a lot of hunting community hadn't been listening to podcasts, but as a fitness guy and getting out and doing other things, and I had been listening to podcasts for 7 or 8 years. I knew Rogan quite well. Anyway, I asked him, hey, would you want to do a podcast? He's like,
I remember you said, you want to do like a 10-minute podcast?
Yeah. I was like, hey, well, we got to talking. He's like, I listen to your show. I like blah, blah, blah. And I was like,
really? Huh?
Really?
What? Huh?
And then he's like, yeah. And I said, do you mind like doing a podcast real quick? Just 15 minutes of your time. I mean, just a few sound bites. And he's like, yeah, I don't have very much time. Just have a little bit of time. But yeah, we could do that. So they sat down.
20 minutes in, you excuse Joe, and he's like, hold on. Wait, no, there's something else we need to talk about.
Yeah.
10 more minutes go by, you excuse Joe, and he goes, wait, we got one more question. And then I think the whole podcast is almost 45, 50 minutes.
It was very generous of Joe because
he's on vacation.
I think part of him,
family.
He didn't know where it was going to go. I wanted to respect his time. So after 10 or 15 minutes, I said, hey, thanks, Joe. And he's like, nah. And he just kept talking. We were having too much fun. And then his like, I don't know who it was, like person was like, Joe, you got to, this is it. Wrap it up.
Someone was tapping their watch.
Yeah. So his what do you call him? Handler?
I don't want to call it a handler.
I don't know, like his agent or whatever.
Agent / bodyguard.
Yeah. Maybe that's what it was. But we had such a good time. And that moment, being able to capitalize on that moment, getting that moment, and then publishing it. And then Joe was gracious enough to mention it on his show. My podcast grew exponentially just by that one moment. And then like a month or 2 later, I quit my job and I did this full time. It was unbelievable. And those things, other things like that have happened over the years, because I put myself in a position for that opportunity to take place at extreme risk to my true career that was paying the bills at the time. I didn't get paid anything for Gritty at the time. And so, but that moment changed everything overnight, along with other hard work I had put in. But I look back and it's like, attacking those moments and trying to capitalize when you can, it just changes your whole life. You get rid of those what ifs. I remember I went up and talked to Spieler for the first time. I was more nervous about Spieler than
fangirled so hard.
I was way more nervous about Spieler than Rogan.
Who? And you're trying to show me who he is, but you couldn't see him because he was he's short. And I was like, who are you talking about? That guy right there.
Yeah, it's funny.
But that episode, if you guys are wondering, is episode 80 of the podcast with Joe and Cam.
Yeah, it's a great one.
It's a good one.
Rogan is funny.
Yeah.
We had a good time. I've had the opportunity to hang out with him a couple of times, and he's just a generous human being.
He's genuinely nice.
Yeah, which is weird because you kind of think someone that with that much influence, like the millions and millions of downloads or whatever. Same with Cam, always have been very nice people.
They lack entitlement, which is a very lovely attribute.
Yeah.
They don't have
They
it.
have
kids.
They have humility.
And I think those kids keep them down to earth.
I don't know. Yeah, Truett does a good job like insulting his father. But I think there's an element of humility combined with confidence, right? And confidence doesn't mean pride and ego. There's not the arrogance. I think arrogance and pride sort of is the opposite of humility, So, yeah, I think that they can be refreshing to talk to. Anyway, we're going to wrap this show up. Hope you enjoyed it. Kind of went on some tangents, but I think a great discussion. I'm excited to actually get into the crazy journey ahead of them because it's a good read. I think you're going to enjoy it. For now, don't get shot in the chest, but if you do, you might want to carry around a speech in your chest pocket. Wild. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Stay gritty.